Hello and welcome to this special episode of MEL Make Stuff. My name is Melissa and today we are going to get started on the finishing of the oak cardigan by Marie Wallin. What do I mean by finishing? So I have my pieces knit, and this is a cardigan that I have made with a lot of steeks, including for the sleeves, the top of the sleeves, the armholes, and the front. So there's a lot of cutting to do, and there's going to be a lot of seaming to do also. I talked a lot about the construction of this cardigan in episode 10, so you can go back if you want to see those details. But for today, what I would like to get done right at this moment is to cut the steeks for my sleeves, which I knit in a tube, and also pick up the stitches for the front of the cardigan before I cut it open. I want to do the bands. I have to knit the front and neck band before I cut it because I screwed up the shaping on the front a little bit and I'm going to be doing a little more cutting than I'm supposed to be. Here is my sleeve tube and this is the body of my cardigan. So I just want to deal with the sleeves first. This looks like a normal set-in sleeve shape, but this is actually both of my sleeves knit together. I have a steek on this side and a steek on this side, which I need to cut. And then I also have steeks along these curved edges here. Right in the center of this stripe here is where I'm gonna cut. This is my steek. You won't see any of these vertical patterned steek stitches once the sleeves are sewn together. The patterns will just continue horizontally across that inner seam. I haven't reinforced this at all. I haven't done crochet stitches. I haven't done any sewing with my sewing machine. I think that this yarn is probably grippy enough that I can cut it without doing any sort of reinforcement. So we will see if I'm right about that. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut. I did a 7-stitch steek here. So I am gonna be cutting right up this center contrast color vertical column here. Steeking is not a big deal. The one thing that I would recommend is a pair of scissors with a short blade. Because if you start going at this with your sewing shears that have a really long blade, you are going to be more likely to maybe cut through the bottom piece or something that you are not intending to cut through, and something with a shorter blade will give you a little more control. The other thing that I always do when steeking something that is in a tube form is I put my other hand underneath where I'm cutting so that I'm sure that I'm not cutting that bottom piece of fabric. Let's go. So hopefully you can see I'm really cutting exactly down the middle of this V, and it is really easy to follow the path if you arrange your steek stitches like this with the vertical colors. I'm gonna go ahead and continue cutting along my armhole curve here, my sleeve cap curve, and just continue going so I can really open this whole thing up. This first cut I made, I have a relatively clean cut here because I was changing colors on this other side here where you can see all of these tails. So when you're cutting this steek where all these tails are, you don't need to weave them in, you don't need to worry about them. It's gonna create a little bit of a mess of yarn tails, but I always keep like a little bowl next to me to stash all my yarn tails so I can throw them away. Another thing that I have seen people do is put a piece of masking tape or something along the side, like you push all your tails to one side, put a piece of masking tape there, and then it will keep all of that organized. You can just take the tape and throw it away at the end. Up here, this side feels like where I did all of my color changes here, so I have a lot of tails, so you'll get to see what this looks like without using the tape method. I'm not worrying about what the tails are doing. I'm just gonna cut right through the middle of the steek again. So you can see some of my tails have come off. That is fine. The ones that haven't, I'm just going to clip them in line with the others. Get rid of the tails just to clean things up a little bit. Halfway there, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. You can see most of these tails will just sort of peel off because I was trying to change my colors in the very center of the steek. Occasionally, maybe I changed a little bit to one side. I am gonna cut everything off flush with the edge that I just cut in the steek because I feel like this is a wide enough steek that I'm not gonna have a problem during the seaming, but again, we'll see. I could be wrong about that. Always double check to make sure I'm cutting down the exact middle. All right. Okay, so now I have my two separate sleeves. I am happy with the way these look at this moment. So what I am gonna do, I think, to start the seaming is to first seam these edges. So on each sleeve, I will take these edges, line them up, and seam with mattress stitch, and then I will set the sleeve cap into the body because right now I already have a round hole on the body. It just has a steek down the center of it that is going to get cut, and then this, once it is attached at the sleeve seam, should fit neatly into that hole that's on the body. That's the goal anyway. Now if I had knit this flat and in pieces so that I had separate front and back and the side seam wasn't joined yet, I might actually take this sleeve cap and sew the cap in first and then seam all the way down the sleeve and all the way down the body. That is sort of a ready to wear technique that is used often, but in this instance it doesn't matter because I don't have an open side seam. It's already closed because I knit the body of the cardigan in the round. For now, I am just going to set these sleeves aside and work on sewing the seams on them when I get the chance to. And the next thing I'm going to do is look and see how I want to pick up stitches along the front of the cardigan for the front bands. When I'm picking up stitches for a button band or a front band along the front side of a cardigan, I always like to use a needle that is at least one full size smaller than the one that I'm going to use to actually knit that button band. For this one, I need a US 2, which is a 2.75 millimeter needle to actually knit the button band. So I am going to use a couple of US 1 needles, which are 2.25 millimeter, to pick up the stitches. And then I will transfer them over to the 2.75 millimeter once I actually start knitting on that band. It would be ideal if I had a super long circular needle to do this because the way that I'm going to pick up is from one side all the way around the back of the neck and then down the other side. But in this instance, I don't have one of those because these needles are so tiny, so I am using two 32-inch circular needles for this. If you saw episode 10, you might remember me talking about how I screwed up the shaping on the front of this cardigan and how I'm going to try to fix it when I pick up these stitches for the front band. Here is the issue. When I was doing the shaping on the front of this cardigan, there are decreases along this front edge that create an open V-neck when it's actually being worn. And for some unexplained reason, I just stopped doing the decreases here, and I should have continued them up almost all the way to the shoulder. So what I'm going to need to do is pick up my stitches along the steek as I ordinarily would, and then at about here I'm going to need to branch off and start picking up stitches in the body of the sweater as I knit it, and then I'm going to cut a wedge out of this area here so that it is the appropriate V shape. Ordinarily along a steek, so my steek is 7 stitches and the ones on the outside are the same as the main color of the rest of the sweater, so they are maybe a little bit more difficult to see, but here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so this is the one I'm going to be cutting eventually. Ordinarily, if I'm picking up stitches for a button band, I would go right in between the steek, 7th steek stitch and the first stitch on the body, like right in there. This is where I would pick up my loops for my button band. But I was thinking that since this whole front of the cardigan is shaped with these decreases, which you can see here. So here's my 7th steek column right here, and here are all of my decreases along the very front opening of my cardigan. So if I were to pick up my button band stitches as I ordinarily would between the 7th steek column and this row of decreases right here, or this column of decreases, what you would end up seeing on the front of the body is this column of decreases right next to that button band. And because I screwed up this shaping up here, let's see if I can show you. So I have my decreases here. Here's my 7th
steek column. Then the decreases stop right about here, and I'm going to be picking up stitches, you know, over in this area. And I am worried it's going to look a little bit weird if you see like this column of decreases going up the front of the button band and then all of a sudden they're not there. I mean, it's going to be subtle because this section is darker compared to the rest of the body anyway. But what I'm thinking I'm going to do is actually pick up the stitches for my button band just to the right of that column of decreases, as opposed to between the decreases and the 7th steek column. I think that will be a little bit of a cleaner look. What you're going to see in that instance to the outside of the button band is just this clean fabric, and you won't actually see this line of decreases. So it wouldn't have been nice if that continued all the way up the front of the sweater, but because it does not, I am just going to make that little adjustment there when I'm picking up my stitches. So I'm going to start picking up along here, and then I will check back in with you once I get up to the problematic area.
Change of plans. I realized I actually do need to cut the steek on the front of this cardigan first in order to pick those stitches up. Otherwise it's going to be a real pain to try to pull them through from the back side of the fabric if it's still in one piece. So we're just going to go ahead and cut. So one thing to note as I am cutting all of these sort of straggly pieces off, if you happened to accidentally join in your yarn at one or the other side of the steek instead of straight down the middle, don't cut that off, because that you're gonna need to weave in. So that can happen sometimes, like if you just brain fart in the middle of this giant piece of color work and you join your yarn in anywhere other than the center of the steek, that is the thing that can sort of unravel and cause a hole if you cut that too short. So if you notice that you've got one to either side of the steek, just leave it there and you can weave it in later. All right, so that is pretty clean. You can see all of these ends that I've got up here were from where I was knitting flat along the edges of the neckline. So I am actually going to leave those there because I am not 100% sure at this point whether they need to be woven in or whether I can cut them off. So for now, to be safe, I'm just going to leave them and then I'll deal with them later. Okay, so now it's time to pick up stitches. I am going to start on the right side of the sweater as it's worn because my first working row needs to be a wrong side row. So I am going to pick up all of these stitches all the way along this side, around the neck, and then back down this side. Then I'm able to just turn around here and start my wrong side row for my first ribbing row on the front bands.
Okay, so here we are. I have picked up my stitches until here. I'm a little bit perplexed by the number of stitches that is recommended to pick up because it seems just like way too many. The ratio from here to where the sloping shaping starts is 1 stitch per row, which ordinarily is way too many for a front band or a button band, but I am thinking that that is because the stitch gauge of the corrugated ribbing is so condensed that the stitches are actually taller than they are wide. And so I think this will possibly end up making sense. But the amount of stitches that I am supposed to pick up between here and the shoulder is more than I even have rows in the garment. So I'm not even sure how to do that. So I am just continuing to pick up 1 stitch per row. I might end up having to reknit this button band, but what are you gonna do? So now I'm up here where I need to continue my shaping where there is none. I need to eliminate 10 stitches by the time I get, I think, around here. So I am just going to continue moving over 1 and up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, because I think that is what the shaping should have been at this point anyway. I should have been decreasing every other round. So I'm gonna do that and see if it works. Okay, so that looks like it worked, because if I trace the path now, if I go straight up the column of stitches where I currently am, I will end up at the point of the shoulder, which is where I should have ended up initially. Now I am just going to put a stitch marker here so that I make sure I'm picking up the same amount of stitches from here to here once I get to this side. And then let us just pray that I don't have to redo this button band because of the stitch pickup ratio. Hello, it's the next day and I have finished knitting the button band, so let me show you how this has turned out.
I'm just binding off now, so I have most of this button band on a 50-inch cable with my 2.75 millimeter needles that I use to actually knit this thing. And I just wanted to show you how the corrugated rib behaves. Corrugated rib wants to flip up. It actually behaves a lot more like stockinette than like ribbing, which can be a little bit off-putting. Yeah, you can tell, hopefully, in profile that it really wants to flip towards the right side of the garment. That's not the greatest. I considered a couple different options for this. One option would have been knitting a facing for the back of this button band, but that will also add a lot of bulk, and I really want to avoid that because there's going to be enough bulk with the steek as it is. Another option might have been to attach a ribbon on the back of this actual button band to hold it flat. Again, that's going to add some bulk and some sort of unnecessary finishing. If it was really going to bother me, I would do that. The other thing that might work also is doing some sort of edging on this button band that will curl towards the wrong side of the garment and sort of counteract that wanting to flip up that the corrugated rib does. I've seen, I think it was on the Tech Knitter blog, I've seen it suggested to do like some reverse stockinette, and that will sort of create almost a rolled edge look that will help counteract that corrugated rib wanting to flip up. But I also don't want a rolled edge on just my button band when there's not a rolled edge anywhere else on the garment. I keep calling it a button band. There's not going to be any buttons. It's just totally open, but whatever, front band. I'm going to take the gamble that I think with the way this front band is behaving so far, I will be able to steam press this so that it will lay flat. You can see it's really not too bad. And I think if I wet block this and pin it so that it definitely is laying as flat as possible and sort of like roll it maybe over my finger and then press it, like actually use an iron to press that, I think that that will relax a little bit. The other thing that I am factoring in is that I am probably always going to be wearing this held together with like a pin. So if I was going to be wearing it open, I might be a little bit more concerned about that band flipping out, but because it's always going to be closed, I think it will be okay. So I'm going to finish binding this off and then I will cut the armhole steeks. So I will see you back here for that.
This is all bound off and you can really see what I'm talking about here with the front bands curling. So I'm still relatively confident that that will press out, that it will block out, but we will see. If it doesn't, I will figure out what to do at that point once I see that it is or is not working. So the next thing that I'm going to do is cut these armhole steeks right here and give this a first try on so that I can see if my sleeves are the correct length before I sew them in. Alright, you guys get to see my gym t-shirt because I'm going to the gym later, so that is why I'm wearing this horrifically bright shirt under here. This I am really happy with the fit of. I'm really happy with how high this comes up under the underarm, because that means that once my sleeve is set in, I'm going to have a good range of motion with my arms. If the armhole was low, that would be a little bit of a problem. There's also really nothing I'd be able to do about it at this point, I don't think. So I am glad that this is fitting correctly. I'm also really happy to see that my hemline is nice and even. It was sort of hard to tell this whole time because knitting this in the tube created like a sort of V shape in the front, and I was sort of crossing my fingers that my logic would work out in terms of how this would fit, and it did. I'm also really pleased with the length of this. I like that just right at the top of my hip length. I find to be a really flattering length on me. So now let us see what will happen if I hold my sleeve up to this and see if I can tell whether the length is correct. This is not going to be an exact science, but if I hold this up to the shoulder where it's going to be sewn in, I can see that this is approximately the correct length
on my arm. It might end up being a little bit bracelet length, which is also fine. And that is a relief because I did make a little bit of adjustment to this sleeve to shorten it a little bit without having the appearance of having shortened the sleeve. So I will talk a little bit about that once this whole thing is finished. But I think this is gonna work out. I think now I'll go ahead and sew these sleeves in, finish off the insides of this, and then I'll be done. As far as setting the sleeves in, I'm going to start at the underarm and sew, again using mattress stitch, to the point where they will stop matching up, which is about here. You can see the pattern on the sleeve ends at about this point on the body, and then I will just sew in the top of the sleeve cap. I will probably put some pins in here just to line up like the very center of the top of the sleeve with the center of the shoulder, but other than that it should be a pretty easy sort of one-to-one match. This is matched up really nicely so far. I'm about at the point where the top of the sleeve stops matching up with what's on the body. So I am going to now put a stitch marker in the very center of this sleeve cap. It's going to be right about here based on the pattern. You can see how the pattern is centered around this, this point right here. I'm just going to clip that directly to the shoulder seam here. Now I'm just going to continue matching up the sleeve cap with the top of the shoulder. Now that I've reached the very top of the shoulder, I'm going to put another pin at this piece of the color work on this other side so that I can now make sure that the top of the shoulder is going in correctly on this other side, and then I'll just continue matching row by row as I go down. Now that both sleeves are sewn in, I'm almost done. The only thing I have left to do other than block this whole thing again is to figure out how I'm going to finish off the steeks on the inside. I've finished off steeks in a number of ways before that create a really nice finish on the inside, like sewing a ribbon down to cover the steek or knitting a facing. But in this instance, I want to have as little bulk as possible, and both the ribbon treatment and the facing add a lot of bulk that I just don't want in this garment because there are so many seams already. For finishes that don't add bulk, my options are leave the steeks as they are. I could needle felt to them. I don't have those supplies, but I'm sure I could find them. But what I think I'm going to do for this garment is something that I saw suggested in an Alice Starmore book, and she said to just cut the steeks down to 2 stitches on each side of the steek and sew them down using a cross stitch or like a herringbone stitch. So that is what I'm gonna do. First I'm gonna deal with this one here along the front band. I had a 7-stitch steek initially, so I have 1, 2, 3.5 steek stitches here. So I'm gonna cut this down about in half, just right up this between these 2 columns of stitches here. And then I'm going to choose a color from one of my colors that I used in this sweater and sew it down. So here I am at the end of my actual steek, and here you can really see how much additional fabric I had at the front that needs to be cut off. So I'm probably going to do a test cut here. Let's just see how this fabric behaves when it's being cut on the bias, because I want to be sure that I'm not totally cutting that that side of the fabric too short. And it looks okay. It's not immediately pulling apart or anything. I might just leave like slightly more fabric in here than along the rest of this steek, just to account for any weirdness that happens as I'm sewing it down.
So I have my trimmed down steeks here, and it did also occur to me as I was cutting these that I could use like a embroidery floss or something like that to sew this down, and I might take a couple minutes to consider that. One thing about that is that it would cause a lot less bulk in this steek section here, but the thing that might be kind of nice about using some of this actual wool to do my stitching down is that it will help encourage all of this to sort of felt into one thing, and I think I might prefer that. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and think about it, but I am likely going to use this actual wool for the stitching down. Alrighty, my front steeks are done. I have used the rose color, which was sort of the least used color in the whole garment, just as a nice contrast to do this. I don't know if that was the right choice because I am not really skilled enough at this technique to make this look good since this is my first time trying it, but hey, it worked and it's functional, and I'm sure I'll get better at doing this in the future. I did find a delightful tutorial from Alice Starmore herself on how to do this, so I will link that in the description box below, and I would highly encourage you to check it out because it's basically a tutorial about steeks in general, and it's fantastic. So now I am going to go ahead and do the sleeves and just continue finishing all this off. One thing that Alice Starmore does say in this tutorial was not to cut the entire length of the steek at once, like I just did. So she says, you know, since you are cutting it down to only 2 stitches, to just cut a couple inches and then sew, like do your first diagonal stitches for your cross stitch for what you've cut so far, and then cut, sew, cut, sew. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that on the sleeves just to be a little bit safer, especially since I have a bunch of curves up here. And yeah, almost there. Alright, here we have it all pinned out. So I definitely tried to put a whole lot of pins in here because this edge wants to turn up, this edge wants to turn up, this edge under here wants to turn up. So I placed pins all along this front edge as often as I could, pretty much. And we will hope that this will suffice. I might also actually press this with my iron before I would consider it completely done. Interestingly, the cuffs don't appear to want to turn up at all. These are just totally fine on their own, so that is sort of nice.
Thank you for joining me on my finishing journey for the oat cardigan. I am going to do the big reveal of this on the next episode of my podcast, which is episode 11. So if you would like to tune back in and see how this actually fits me, please feel free to subscribe and ring the bell so that you can get notified when I post the next episode. Thanks so much for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.